Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Evident. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We've got an exciting panel ahead, but first, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First of all, we are recording today's session, so if you'd like to rewatch at a later time, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an on-demand link via email shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first and easiest way is the chat tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. So if you see that chat tab, I'd like you to test it out for us and let us know from where in the world you're joining. If you have any specific questions, we do want you to send those questions to the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of the chat. Sending in your questions to the Q&A helps us keep track of all of the questions we receive, and we want to be sure to answer as many as we can today. Additionally, Techstrong is giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards at random during today's program, and Evident will be selecting one question, the best question today, to receive a £50 or €60 Amazon voucher as well. So we've got a lot of money going around today. Be sure to participate and be here if you want to win any of it. Perfect. So our topic of discussion today is Cloud Voyage, navigating success and with FinOps at every stage. And I'm joined today by a wonderful panel, but I'm going to leave it to Tara Tapper, COO of Evident, and she's also our moderator for today's discussion. So Tara, I'll turn the microphone over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Cody, and welcome everybody. We're absolutely delighted that you have carved out some time from your busy schedules to join us today to talk about this fascinating topic. And we've got a wonderful panel here who are going to walk us all through the navigating success through FinOps as part of your Cloud Voyage story. So I'm going to start with introducing our panel to you. Firstly, we have Chris Hennesey, Enterprise Finance Strategist from AWS, who are one of our strategic partners. Welcome, Chris. We also have Ian Brown, Director of Cloud Transformation at Keyloop. Keyloop is one of our most important clients, and Keyloop are on that journey right at the moment. So Ian is right in the middle of that journey, and I'm sure it will be really fascinating to hear from him what his experiences has been going through that. So we look forward to hearing more about that in-depth case study. And then last but not least at all is our own very own Stephen Old, who is Global Head of FinOps at Evident. And Stephen's had some amazing experience over the years working with customers. So we're really looking forward to hearing about his insights. So that's just the top line of our panel, but I'm sure you want to get to know them a little bit better. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn just to say a little bit about yourself, about your role, and about the organization you work for. So Chris, can we start with you, please?
Yes. Thanks, Tara. As mentioned, Chris Hennesey, I've been with AWS just under 3 years, helping organizations, kind of guide through the financial management changes as you go to the cloud. Prior to joining AWS, I spent over 20 years at a large bank in the US, at Capital One Bank, and stood up their FinOps function and executed at scale and going through a transformation. So very excited to share insight, not only from my own experience, but for what we're hearing from our customers around how they're navigating this and the best practices.
Thank you, Chris. Ian, could you go next, please?
Yeah, certainly. So a quick introduction to Keyloop, I guess, before myself. So Keyloop is the leading provider of software and services to the automotive retail industry. The company can trace its history back over about 40 years. I've been with them for at least 20 of those in various roles. Our history is one of our kind of core products, or something we call DMS, which is really an ERP system that's heavily tailored towards automotive retail. And then over the years, we built layered applications around that to extend functionality and capabilities. And then in more recent years, our strategy is more to provide platform services based around data and APIs to our customers, their customers, our engineering teams, and to third parties to help integrate. Our estate is global. We have huge legacy, huge number of different platforms and services running pretty much every technology you can think of, clustered in 9 different data centers around the world. And yeah, as you talk, I'm sure we'll come onto it later on as we talk about the detail. So I've been with the company for about 25 years in various roles, from infrastructure architect, software developer in the very early days, and more recently leading the cloud transformation program, leveraging all of that experience.
Great, thank you, Ian. And I'm really looking forward to hearing those insights, both on your journey and any advice you really have for our listeners who are thinking about engaging upon that journey themselves. And Stephen, over to you.
I'm Stephen. I'm the global head of FinOps at Eviden. I've been in the space for around 7 years, which is a long time. Before it was really called FinOps. I'm the co-host and founder of What's New in Cloud FinOps, which is a podcast, letting people not have to do the boring piece of working out all the new things that come out. And it's a real privilege to be here with Ian, who I've been working with over the last year or two. And actually, I know of Chris because Capital One are one of the kind of people that people look up to in the FinOps space as people that really were kind of ahead of their time in running. So having Chris here, he's got a real wealth of experience. It's great to have him as well.
Wonderful. So we got 3 of the best to give you a broad range of insights into this topic. But let's start with establishing what is it we're talking about today. FinOps as a concept is probably one that is worth a little bit of explaining. So I'm going to start with Stephen and ask Stephen, if you can just give us a definition, what is FinOps? And then we'll move to Chris, who can tell us about those strategic insights around what's going on in the market and what are some of the kind of key things to be thinking about. So Stephen, let's start with framing out what we mean when we talk about FinOps.
Well, I'll use the FinOps Foundation, which is kind of the core and the heart of our community, with their definition, which is FinOps is an evolving cloud financial management discipline and cultural practice that enables organizations to get maximum business value by helping engineering, finance, technology, and business teams to collaborate on data-driven spending decisions. I mean, it's quite a mouthful. If I was to try to distill what I say it is when I talk to people, because unless you go to like a FinOps conference, everyone asks what you mean when you say your job's in FinOps, right? So what I say to people is, I help people understand the value they're getting from cloud and make sure that value is as great as it can be. A lot of people always talk about cost and cost savings and this kind of stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but actually it's more about what value is this bringing, and am I making good business decisions based on the data my FinOps teams are bringing me?
Yeah, and if you're not already in the cloud, the whole kind of financial construct modeling, variability is both a blessing and a curse. So it's all about that, is how you kind of wield this this new territory and make it work for you.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we see is that people think cloud is just a technology decision, right? But it's a business decision. And when it's a business decision, it's impacting all over the business, and it's impacting finance. And that's why, people in our world, we have to have both hats, and we have to be able to build the bridge between the two, because traditionally they've had very different ways of communicating and interacting between technology and finance, because it's all been pre-bought, it's always been capex, it's always been budgeted very easily, and suddenly the whole world's changing, and it's how do we take the whole organization on a journey where they're getting the most and understanding their cloud spend, their cloud usage, and the cloud journey, so it's not scaring anyone in the organization.
So I think that's a good segue, kind of, Chris, for you. So how do you, your whole role is about helping kind of talk to customers around understanding this new opportunity ahead of them and how they navigate that. So really interested to hear your insights about the market and particularly what the drivers for customers to really want to have discussions around FinOps.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I love Stephen's definition of focusing on enablement of value for the organization. A lot of times when I talk to leaders, either technical leaders or finance leaders, about FinOps, especially when they're early in their journey, they're always looking for a purpose and kind of a North Star of what to work back for. And I think what Stephen just outlined is great. The other question I get a lot, usually when I'm engaging with customers, is they tend to see more increased usage of their cloud as maybe their organization's transforming. They maybe haven't pivoted or really understood a lot of the services and capabilities, especially in finance, of cloud. So costs continue to rise as you shift, and you may have dual costs. And then they just get concerned around, how do I make sense out of who's using the services? How do I link it to value? And there tends to be a sense of escalation early in this journey, and then a desire to kind of remediate and take action. So I think in the beginning, there's just a little bit of questions and concern around, how do I need to change my governance practices as I engage in the cloud? And the key is that you want to ensure that you're driving kind of and taking advantage of the levers that exist in the cloud to not waste money. You want to ensure that kind of bad spend is removed. But you also need to transform the potentially bad habits that engineers may have around not understanding the cause and effect of what they're doing in the cloud. So at least from my vantage point, I think the others can attest, engineers want to do the right thing. They want to be efficient. They want to run a really well-run organization and application footprint. But a lot of times in corporations, they struggle to give transparency and awareness to the engineering community. So I think that's a big role within FinOps, and we're going to talk about that today. And I'm excited to hear the journey around, how do you give transparency and support the right level of accountability to drive the right outcomes for the organization. And that's all what is at the heart of FinOps, and definitely what's on customers' minds as I talk to them.
That's great. And I think this whole question around accountability, habits, best practice, finding, I suppose, a kind of new culture to operate within, to really kind of harness the value, I think is an amazing one. And Ian, I know I've got a little bit taster of your journey, so I'm really hoping to flesh some of that out. But before we get into all of that, I'm just really kind of interested to know, at what point would you recommend people who are considering this journey into the cloud, they maybe haven't migrated yet, or they've started that journey, when is the right time to be thinking about FinOps? Is it at the beginning, or is it actually after you've kind of moved everything and then you're trying to sort it all out? What's your recommendation? Kind of, Chris, to you first.
Yeah. I think today is the right time. So and specifically, it doesn't matter if you've already started and haven't begun a FinOps function, or if you're just getting started. I think starting right away is the right thing, and I think all of us can attest to live this. There's varying ways that you can get started, but really thinking about, and what I typically see is a lot of organizations, when they're in the early stage, don't have dedicated resources, in quotes, to FinOps. At least that's what they'll say. But in reality, they have the resources available. So you have the people. It's more about getting organized, thinking about maybe how you form as a virtual team if you don't have the dedicated staff, and begin thinking and framing out, what are the governance and principles that we should outline? What are the engineering practices and guardrails that we should leverage? So my advice personally is, don't worry too much if you are a little bit worried that you haven't gotten started. You can get started today, and more than likely you've already begun. You don't even realize it. It's about formulating that team, creating that community. And we're going to talk a lot about tools and all the practices that go into it. But I personally would recommend take action today to formulate the strategy and the approach and the governance and guardrails, and begin getting buy-in around the way in which you potentially need to engage differently with your engineering community.
Fabulous. Now, before we hand over the stage to Ian to talk us through his experience, Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to add before we get into that?
Yeah, I think Chris makes a great point about governance and the importance of kind of looking at FinOps as a governance piece. And if we think about the other areas of governance, we think about things like security. Actually, in terms of how you enact processes and policy for FinOps, it's very similar to security. Spend is now happening all the time, just like your moving security posture is constantly changing. And because of that, everyone thinks in the company, we need to think about security before we do something, not afterwards. And it's the same story. We need to be thinking about FinOps and how to manage our finances, our costs, and how we're working with the cloud at the beginning, or as soon as possible if we're already there. So I think Chris is exactly right. And sometimes just that link to security helps people think about it in the same way.
Brilliant, thank you. So now hopefully that has really set the frame, and we all know what we're talking about. And I love your analogy there, is like security is a great analogy there. You know, it's too late as an afterthought, so you really need to kind of design it in right from the beginning. Right, Ian, I'm going to ask you to wait just one more minute. I just wanted to call out to our audience here. So we are so delighted to have you here, and we really want to make this as interactive as possible. So please do, you know, contribute your thoughts and any comments you have in the chat. So hopefully you can see the chat in the Techstrong platform in front of you. And then in the Q&A section, we really are looking for your questions. You know, you never know, you might be judged as the best question of the day and get that €60 or £50 Amazon voucher. The other thing just I wanted to mention here for anybody who's interested, and we'll signpost how to avail of this later on, but Stephen has offered a free workshop for a limited number of you who are interested in engaging in a more deeper level to explore how to embark upon the planning and particularly making the business case for this journey. So, you know, have a think about that. And if you're interested at all, we either kind of pop your interest in the chat, or we'll signpost other ways of getting in touch later on in this webinar. Okay, so I think I've kept you all waiting long enough. I think the star turn to really bring this topic to life and off the page, off the screen, is the dynamic Ian Brown. Ian, so delighted to be here. We did a bit of a run through the other day. And obviously, I know you're one of our key accounts, but actually kind of hearing from you how your journey's been, what you've learned along the way, and some of, I suppose, the things that were unexpected, both benefits and challenges. There's nothing like hearing a story from end to end. You're not actually at the end of it yet. You're partway through the journey, but please just kind of talk us through it, you know, starting with the where you started and why. And I'm just going to hand over to you and let you tell your own story in your own way.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. And, you know, really interesting, you know, to hear Chris's take on that, because a lot of it resonates a lot with what we've seen and done. You know, some of it supported with evidence, and I work with evidence. Some of it we've blundered into ourselves and, you know, found the solution. So, you know, it's really interesting to hear, you know, that take. I think for Keyloop, I think this started probably a couple of years ago, and we already had a small cloud presence. You know, I mentioned our strategic initiatives based around APIs and data, which was already being developed in a cloud native fashion. I think for us, though, the core business, as I mentioned, in those 9 data centers and, you know, several thousand VMs, you know, it was kind of our heartland, and it was providing a lot of the tools and knowledge and data and capabilities that power those APIs and data services. I think for us, there were a number of factors as we looked at it. I mean, obviously, the world's evolving, and you know, the whole kind of USP with the cloud being, you know, speed, agility, and innovation is something that, you know, we all want to be part of. And I think we recognized that in a traditional data center model, it's harder to deliver that stuff in a cohesive way to an enterprise of our size, and in a way that suits the kind of speed and agility requirements of the business. So that was kind of where our initial thoughts started, and it was shaped by some of the platform work we were doing. I think adding to that, we've got things like the emerging, you know, geopolitical situation where data protection and data sovereignty is becoming more prevalent. You know, the need to be able to quickly respond to those, you know, emerging, you know, laws and political situations means we have to be able to spin up services quickly in diverse regions, and it's not easy to spin up a data center quickly, and not at a low cost either. So that was another big influence for us about where we're heading. And then I think finally, you know, there's the piece around, you know, is hosting our core business. You know, we're a software and services provider. You know, it's typically a means to an end to provide our services, and we're really good at it. You know, but back to it gets harder and harder as time goes by to keep up with the technical innovation, the security requirements, and everything else that goes with it. So, you know, all of those drivers came together, along with support from our kind of board and our C-suite, who are very kind of proactive in that area, to say, you know, we really need to look at this program and start looking at, you know, what does transformation look like for Keyloop. I think in terms of FinOps, and, you know, back to the point, you know, Chris and Steve made, it does start at day one. For us, it was all about building the business case. You know, yes, we want to transform. Yes, we want to migrate. but not at any cost, right? We've got to understand what it looks like. And I think our FinOps journey, if you like, started with just understanding our estate and looking at all the huge amount of information that Amazon provide on their services and costs. And that was really where this stuff starts to hit home. And, and back to what Stephen said, costs are one thing, and they're relatively easy to get, maybe harder to tune, but they're easy to get the building block costs together. But understanding the real value and the differences and what building, an EC2 in Amazon means and what's different there to building a VM in a data center and trying to understand all that picture was huge for us. We spent a lot of time on the business case, went through several iterations. And obviously, we started this before Evident came on board, and when Evident came on board and we partnered with CloudReach as it was, they really helped support that business case and understand based on real world, maybe some of the things that we, I guess, underestimated, or some of the things we, maybe overestimated in some areas as well. So that experience was hugely supportive to the business case. It was also for us about finding, where's the value and what are we anchoring back to and how do we prove the business case? We all probably know about transformation programs. The longer they run, the more they cost, right? We're in dual run. We've got cost in one place, we've got cost in the other place. So we need to do this quickly. We need to be aggressive about it. But we also need to anchor back to where's the value. And for us, we looked at a few different iterations based on product, based on regions, but ultimately we settled on, the real saving comes when we're able to exit a data center and remove the costs associated with that data center, whether it's real estate, rent, power, cooling, maintenance, whatever it may be. And that's kind of what shaped our migration program to track our data center exits rather than by product. So, today we're just coming to the end of year one of a 4-year program. We've exited one of the UK data centers. We're just coming up to the exit of a data center in Chicago. And we're just starting the work to plan the migrations out of our Japan and South Africa data centers as well throughout the course of next year. And I think that's phase one, right? Is that business case. And this is where you start building your initial relationships, particularly with finance. At this point, that's probably where your first kind of big relationship is going to be, as you need to understand all the costs and the value that you're trying to bring, and trying to understand the costs that the business has got invested in the data centers today to build the business case. I think phase two for us started pretty much the moment we started migrating, and again, the cloud, it's a consumption-based model. The moment you start putting workloads in is the moment that the clock starts ticking on the cost. And I think for us, that phase was really, I think from a FinOps perspective, we're more focused on the bottom line at that point. We're not really into the super granular detail of, where the inter-AZ costs more than we expected, where the guard duty costs higher than we anticipated. It's more about, are we in line with the business case? How are we tracking against it? And it's really important because you need to build that confidence in the business, both with your C-suite and your teams that, the model was good. We are living up to what we expected. We are delivering on what was expected. And also understanding what the element of drift is, partly, back to that consumption model. You're not going to get the same spend every month in, month out. There are variations. So a lot of it was being comfortable with that and understanding that even with those variations, we're tracking towards, what the business case was expected to deliver for us. And again, this is where I think you start hitting some of the early challenges, with the business, and, for people to understand that shift of model, into that, OPEX model, into that variable model, and what it means, and to be comfortable with that little bit of like I say, sort of cost drift that's going on. But also important at this point that, you're tracking that drift, because as we know, from a cloud perspective, that small drift can become a big one quite quickly if you're not observing and in control of it. And again, I think, with the work with Evident, we were able to bring in tooling and experience to help, understand where to look and how to analyze it. Amazon's Cost Explorer is a fantastic tool, but we coupled that with Cloud Health as well as part of our work with Evident. And again, between them, those tools are providing a huge amount of information. And I'd say at the early phases of migration, probably too much. It's a lot to focus on. So you need to pick the big tickets, and make sure you're working on it. The detail will come later. And I think we're kind of exiting that phase now. We've done several migrations. We've closed a data center. We've moved several hundred workloads. And I think we're at the point now where, the model is good. We're happy. We're confident. And I think for me, phase 3 of our FinOps journey is just starting, and that's really the culture, right? And taking all that information and all that data, and making it mean something with the individual kind of functional areas in the business. So, you know, finance is still there, but, you know, that tie to engineering, being able to surface that data to them, and our software engineers and developers can understand, you know, that code commit, that piece of infrastructure that they just delivered through code is immediately, you know, you can see the impact of that. And I think them having that sense of ownership and being able to control that is huge in building that culture. And then, you know, for the same thing we do with our product teams as well. So, you know, again, taking that data and looking at it and understanding, you know, what are the cost drivers, not just for what's driving the cost to serve the product, but also for what's driving, you know, the jumping cost. Is that every time I add a user, a site, you know, a new installation, whatever it may be, but being able to directly map that back. And that was very, very hard in the kind of VMware world in the data center, where costs just get blended at a very high level. With Amazon, you can immediately see it, you know, and I think that's, you know, that was another important thing. So I think for us now, we're in that phase of building that culture, building those kind of relationships and champions in the different functional areas, and really starting to make it mean something in the business. So I think that's where we are today, and we've got a long way to go, but I think it's all looking good, and we're starting to see the, you know, the buy-in, I think, and the acceptance from parts of the business that previously wouldn't have understood this or didn't want to be engaged. But now, you know, you can start democratizing it, and it's brilliant from that. So we're, you know, really starting to see the rewards of it.
Thank you, Ian. That was excellent. Steve, I was just going to invite you in really to kind of to add to that story, because you've been on this journey as well. So, you know, this particular Keyloop, there's quite a few things, Ian, that you've touched on there that I'd like to kind of dig into, but I'd really like to kind of round out the story with Stephen's perspective first.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Keyloop have done so well, and obviously I've worked on a lot of these, is they understand the change in requirement when it comes to budgeting and forecasting. And that back in the old world, budgets had to be perfect, pretty much, right? But now they have to be defensible. You have to be able to explain why that number was there and then why it may have changed. And Ian's exactly right. You have to start on the big ticket items and look for big variances. And then as you mature along what we call crawl, walk, run maturity model, you get more and more in depth as to how detailed you start looking, because hopefully, as you're maturing, you fix those big ticket items. And so actually it's smaller and smaller things you're changing. And from very early on, working with Ian and the team, that was already in mind. It's right, okay, when we're going to build out this forecast, when we're going to build out this business case, let's be conservative in some ways, in terms of let's make sure that we are not over committing in terms of our purchase of RIs, savings plans, that kind of thing. But in terms of our building the business case for how much it may cost, let's make sure we're being realistic and not trying to say, oh, it's going to save this much money for definite. Let's put what we really think it's going to cost. Let's not lie about the business case. The value's coming elsewhere. And some people, when they're building the business case, are really trying to make it look as cheap as humanly possible, right? And that's where you hear all these horrible stories. Ian and co never did that. They always were leveled in reality. And when we came on board, we were able to help just tweak that reality with our additional experience of, you may not even thought about this, but this will cost you, or this actually will be a lot quicker and cheaper than you think, because you'll be able to change that sooner, and those kind of pieces. And it was a bit of a match made in heaven, because they thought so well in advance, which we don't always see.
I'm interested in this kind of leap of faith. I can imagine there's kind of quite a few nervous people at the end of this webinar thinking, this variable cost model, how does that work? How do I keep control of that? How do I govern it? And where does accountability sit? So I'd be interested just to kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Do you want me to go first on accountability?
Yes, please. Yes.
Oh.
So, Ian, I'd really like to kind of hear, you know, maybe a little bit from you on that as well.
Yeah, I think all of us will have something on this. Accountability is king. One of the things you see in some organizations is one of the big changes in going onto this cloud cost model is that the people spending money are engineers, and they are spending money, and finance and their managers will find out about it on the invoice that comes the following month. And by then it's too late to change, right? So there has to be some trust, but these people who are responsible for spend also need to be able to see it and understand the impacts of what they're doing. Another thing that Ian was talking about, over time, you democratize this data so they can see what the impacts of what they're doing are. And so what you need to make sure in how you plan all this kind of stuff is that the accountability for spend, i.e. P&L, or just maybe where your chargeback or your showback's going, isn't too far removed from those responsible parties. If it's all the way up at a CTO and the 6 layers in between, then it's very hard to drive down that message and create that culture of them understanding the impact of what they do. We call it the Prius effect. But really, if you can create accountability as close to responsibility, what Ian's team do really well is, it's about products. And, the product has an owner, and then they have the engineers working on that product, and that works nicely. And I'll let Ian talk a bit more about how they do it specifically.
Yeah, it was a big thing for us. I think if we go back in time, we didn't really have that. We maybe had some showback at best, but a lot of it was blended costs, from infrastructure and with VMware, your costs do vary, but you can't present them in a varied way, because you've got a fixed cost that just gets divided basically by some factor. But I think for us, the move to that, effectively product perspective of the world, starting with showback and moving to actual chargeback, was key. But I think it also has an effect on your model that you choose to use and how you choose to deliver, your account structure in AWS, for example, your tags, everything else. You need to make sure that you've built that in a way that you can easily attribute those costs to the right place. And also understand that even then, you do have some infrastructure costs that are enterprise-wide and blended, and you may well need to also find an allocation model for those as well. But you know what they are, which is the nice thing, right? They're very clear. And you know how to do that. So I think there's some decision points in your initial design of your kind of cloud architecture and landing zone, and then we can start pushing the accountability back to the product owners. And from experience, I think it's easy to say we've had quite a few product owners come back and say, "Oh, that's expensive," when they get their first breakdown of cost. But I think the reality is it's expensive compared to what. And I think everything's expensive when it's compared to either nothing or a vague impression of what my costs might be. So I think, it gives us a baseline and it says, no, this is it. And we've got the data to back it up. You can understand the compute, whatever it may be, whether they're containers or VMs, the storage, the network, and the security piece. It's all there, right? And you can break it down. And I think, equal, and you can even break that out. So if you kind of think of it as a cube of data, you can take the product costs, but you can also slice that to say, what are our security costs, both by product and in total. So again, it's really enabling, from both sides of the coin, depending on who you're trying to report to. But yeah, it's the empowerment of the product owners has been huge, just because of that. And we've had to put time in. We've had to work with them to explain and understand and translate some of the reasons why the costs are the costs, and then plan for the future on how we can reduce those costs. Either through savings plans, reserved instances, just turning stuff off, moving to different instance types, all that kind of stuff, all those tools you've got.
So it feels like it's been a real kind of driver of a more broader culture of commerciality across your business and people.
Oh, very much.
Understanding what is the true cost of doing business, rather than the kind of sexy headline, top line stuff, and not really being aware of everything that feeds into that.
Yes, nowhere to hide, right? It's all clear, and but I think part of our job, it does, and I think part of our job, as a CCOE and running the FinOps function, is to make sure that people understand that as well. Because it isn't always, you can't always assume people understand, the cloud model, the savings plan, the commitment model, all that kind of stuff. So you need to help support the business in that journey as well. When you're working with the different, I mentioned the functional areas, but the different teams there, to try and translate that, what can be quite technical into, something that they'll understand and come up with. Great.
And Chris, I can see you nodding along at all that. So give you the chance to kind of add your perspective here.
No, it's great to hear Ian's evolution, and it sounds like a great partnership as well around getting there. But I think one of the things he mentioned, which is that comparability point, is a really important one, because what I'll see with a lot of customers is they don't have transparency on-prem. they don't fully understand kind of that translation to, and I've seen some questions in the Q&A of like, what level do you provide transparency into? Do you go to the application level, and what's the best way to do that? So I think some of the things, and it sounds like Ian in partnership with Stephen kind of thought about on the front end was, what's the, like tactically, what's the right account and tagging strategy that you should have as you think about your cloud infrastructure? And what I typically see is the more you can mimic how you align your products or your accountability inside of your organization, it goes a long way towards what Ian just mentioned around that transparency and transformation on the product side. So really think through what that means. There's a lot of other considerations like security and blast radius for account structure, but in reality, being really deliberate about what are some required tags versus optional tags as you think about your cloud usage, and be really clear on as a FinOps team, you need transparency and traceability inside of this to hold people accountable, to give the right insight, to like you mentioned, to make the right decisions around what products we should invest in and not invest in. So product level P&Ls tend to be another conversation that follows as you go through this. It's not all about cost. It's giving an insight to cost to as an enablement to the right business decision for the organization. And I know from my journey, while we felt great about our allocations on-prem, once you go to the cloud, you have a transparent level that you never have had before, which is really great. But it may result in you need to change your business or evolve how you do things. Because I know in my experience, some areas or businesses were much heavier consumers of technology than what we had emulated in the allocations that we had on-prem. So it changes the dynamics of that. So that really registered, Ian, for me. And one thing I advise people to do before they get started, or if they're just getting started, like create a baseline of current state of how things are today, even if you don't have the transparency that you may have. I've done workshops high level with people, like, what's your total cost of IT? Like, what's the breakdown of that cost? What's your how many applications do you have? How do you attribute that applications? And Ian mentioned the shared platforms, which is really like the thorn in a lot of people's side, is like, how do I attribute shared platforms that aren't clear? And Ian said it, hit the nail on the head. You just need to attribute it in some way. Choose a consumption driver and attribute it. So a lot of gold in what Ian just shared there, and it's definitely registering with what other customers are dealing with as well.
Great, thank you. Look, there was actually loads of questions I had, but actually I'm seeing some great questions coming out either in the chat or in the Q&A. So I'm actually going to kind of switch up the format slightly, and let's actually kind of dig into some of those questions now. Cody, I don't know if you're there and you've been keeping an eye on the questions for us. And then we'll circle back to talking about partnering and talent after that, if that's okay with you all. Welcome back, Cody. So what questions have our audience got for us? What are they interested in knowing more about?
So we have received a lot of questions, like you said. So I'm just going to kind of start taking them from the top here. So in enterprise resource planning systems like SAP, people claim that this application is primarily for better decisions and quicker decisions. What's the big difference with FinOps? Chris, do you have any insights here?
Yeah, and obviously, anytime there's an SAP application, it's kind of like the heart, the backbone of an organization of the core financial data and things that are there. I think the specifics of what's different with FinOps, one, there's a specific focus on kind of the cost management and consumption of the services and technology that's there. With FinOps, there's a huge emphasis on collaboration between teams. So as you think about a core system, gaining insight into that, where FinOps can be a differentiator is you tend to be a really good partnership between the engineering community and the finance community, and you need to work together to collaborate to ensure you're getting the value and the right insight into that. And in the end, as Ian mentioned, it's not just specific to SAP, but it could be applied to any application in your organization, which is how do you optimize the spend of that to deliver the most value for the organization? And usually core platforms, I always use the kind of Pareto principle with cloud. It works out pretty well, which is the top 20% of applications consume about 80% of your cloud costs. So an application like SAP or other large ones, they tend to be big consumers of infrastructure. And the more you can dive in with the FinOps ecosystem and the right practices, the better insight and value you'll get out of that type of a platform. I don't know specifically from your vantage point, Stephen, is that something you see as well with customers?
Yeah, it's not one or the other, right? ERP systems are around being able to see end-to-end journeys and that kind of thing, what's going on in your organization to help you see blocking points and benefits, right? While the FinOps piece, we're looking at, hopefully, what value you're getting out of innovation and technology and where you should double down. And I think that's where you've got to look at it. It's a case of, if we're doing the right things, and Hugo's got a great question, we'll come on to in a minute, which will answer some of this. If we're doing the right things where we understand where we're getting the best value from the cloud, we can understand where to make the right investments. Or sometimes the opposite. Actually, what's costing us a lot more money than we're making from it, and we never realized because of how we were, allocating costs previously, hasn't met the reality of when we've gone into cloud.
Perfect. So it looks like we've got a question that's pretty in the same vein here. So are there any methods in FinOps to measure cloud investments in business terms and not just as cost control metrics?
I'll jump straight on that one. That's a fantastic question. And we generally talk about this thing called unit economics in FinOps, which is taking allocated costs and then putting them against a real business metric. So let's think about some of Ian's applications, and they have end users. So let's take that cost of $100 and then say it's got 100 users on it at the moment, and we can say it's $1 per user. And then as Ian's team make changes, does that improve or worsen? And so you can actually see whether the changes you're making are improving or worsening the value against your key metrics, which is your return per customer, right? Especially if you're selling on a per license approach. That's a really simple way of looking at it. But if you've got a machine learning part of your organization who are running a lot of models, you can start looking at your price per model and see whether you're getting the value back on maybe the outputs you can get for selling that data on and the things from that. So it's actually around looking at what drives my business. If you're already allocating down to workload owners, application owners, product owners, what are their drivers? And then can we make a business metric that matches the two so we can see whether these things are improving over time? And that's where you start making better business decisions using your cloud.
All right, do we have any other insights from the panel here?
Yeah, I think
I think I'll just echo what Stephen said. I think that's been our experience as well. There's a tendency to think of FinOps as just the numbers and just the costs, but it's true. It's how you take that and use that to drive those decisions and how you translate them into the business case and into the real world situations. And it starts with the attribution. I can understand these servers cost me this much money, this data cost me that much money, but then it also folds into the strategy, right? You may well see a path for a product to become far more effective from a cost perspective, but the cost of that change could be far more than the tactical or strategic future of that product's going to support. So it does open up a lot of conversations about what's right and what's viable, and just because you can do something, is it right? But it can provoke a lot of those conversations and insight, which I think is really important.
All right, so considering that the vast majority of organizations have investments in both their own data centers and in the cloud, how can you achieve a unified financial management that includes both FinOps and traditional cost management?
Yeah, I can share some thoughts because I know this notion of single pane of glass comes up all the time with customers because a lot of organizations have a varied footprint. They may have on-prem, they may have a single cloud, they may have multiple clouds that they're engaging with. So I think, Cody, that question is a great one because it's, FinOps teams, their job, one of their main jobs is to provide transparency. So sometimes they need to navigate these multiple footprints as they go through that. My personal advice is I would think about how long you're going to be in this kind of dual environment as one consideration. If you have a permanent hybrid solution, you have to solve for that single pane of glass. You need to find a way to integrate that. And that may involve working with different data sets and bringing that together. But you have to look at where's there a common footprint and a common feel. I'm a huge believer in application level transparency personally, because it helps give a level of insight deeper inside of the IT organization. Because I know a lot of these engineers are living and breathing the security of their applications, the resiliency of their applications. I think adding that third leg of the stool around the financial and cost management elements to that application ownership goes a really long way. So if you have a common element, you just need to architect the right information to come together in that way. If you're telling me we're going all in the cloud and we're going to be done within 6 to 9 to 12 months, well, you can probably manage through the seam and then really focus in on the right end state and then and manage things as you have before. This adds a lot of complexity for FinOps teams, though, that was called out. So I think this is an area where you need to understand your organization strategy and what's the right way to get there. And that's where, at least from my vantage point, when I was a customer, I couldn't fully leverage all the AWS tooling because I couldn't integrate all of the multiple footprints together. So you have to think of what's the right reporting and tooling to support that. And I know AWS is working on supporting multi-cloud through Cost Explorer and other things. But the reality of it is you're going to need to find either build your own or leverage a partner to bring that together in that single pane of glass. So I think that's really important. Ian, do you have any additional thoughts? I see your head nodding a lot on that.
Yeah, no, exactly what we're saying. Right? It's hard. It is hard. And I think we have those conversations at least once a month, and variations of them based on, a single pane of glass for cost, for security, for patching, for backup, for tooling, whatever it might be. It comes up a lot. And I think exactly what you said. It all depends on how long you've got to sustain it for and what the end game is. For the shorter term, with a known outcome, and that's generally where we end up, is we live with it, and we just accept it's going to be difficult for a while. But yeah, I think if it is long term, you need to try to find a way to make that work. But it comes up in strange places as well, because things like I don't know, take SCCM for example for patching. Your renewal cycles are unlikely to align with your your project deliverables and your timescales to move. So you end up trying to understand, when will this hit, and is it worth renewing it, or is that the point at which we break? And it is a complex area. But you're right. I think just anchor back to how long you've got to kind of sustain your running for, and and let that help you make the decision.
I think even if you had good application level transparency before, I think you touched on this earlier, Chris, when you move to the cloud, it's a whole different level, and what you had before doesn't quite still work. But when you have then done it for the cloud data and the huge amount of volume and insight there is in that, you can backwards engineer that back onto your on-premise state and take some of those learnings. What people sometimes get wrong is when you're buying from AWS, a lot of things have been covered for you. You're not paying for the security teams, you're not paying for the electricity, all these kind of pieces. And so when people start putting these numbers side by side versus their old allocations, they just don't look right. And that's because you've basically got to create a shared cost of those gray numbers that you're not paying for an AWS, apply those to your on-premise state with an allocation method like we talked about earlier. You just need to decide one, probably by consumption of VMs or something like that. And then those costs are more aligned. You're never going to be comparing apples with apples, but it might be a pear instead of an orange, right? And that's where you kind of need to get to. You need to make your learnings for cloud and then retrofit them, because you're not going to get cloud to fit into what you were doing before most of the time.
All right, so Ian,
I think you've got time for probably one more question. I'm seeing loads of questions flooding in, and I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them. So please don't take offense, anybody, if we don't manage to get to your particular question. But I think if we can cover one more, and then I just wanted to circle back to the topic of partnering and skills.
Of course. So I think this one I'm going to throw over to Ian. So how granular is collected data? Do teams look into the costs of each application, and how does the company address cost versus outcome so that each team is consuming the appropriate amount of the budget?
It's a good question, and it's a journey, right? and I think for us, we have teams at every point on the spectrum of maturity. We have teams that are very keyed into this, that can pretty much take all the data you can throw at them and will translate it themselves and understand it and tell you the answer. And we have other teams where we need to work very closely to do that. I think the granularity of the data is huge, right? Almost everything is there at a very granular level, from data transfers to, run hours to, you name it. I don't think there's anything we've really found that isn't covered in some way. So you can get to a crazy level. I think, like we said earlier, I think the problem is you can get lost in the data as well, and you end up wondering why I spent that 50 cents on something when you should be looking at why did I spend the $10,000. And it's very easy sometimes to pick the simple stuff, right, where you should be looking at the big stuff. But I think, you know, once you've done the work with the teams and help them interpret it, and it could be different views to the same team, right? You might well be looking at, you know, and helping the engineers understand what they're delivering, and the product owners, you know, how that relates to them, and also for the architects as well in terms of the patterns and blueprints they want to use. So you know, you might end up with that at different levels. But for us, we're kind of moving towards an individual product P&L. So the teams really, their budget is assigned to their product. Their expenditure is tied to that product. So it becomes fairly easy, I think, to track the two and regularly meet with them and stay on top of where they are. And I think that's probably key. And I think that's something from this perspective is you need to be thinking about how you're going to handle that individual product assignment so you can do that. So budget for it and then, you know, track the costs against that budget to be able to do it. Hopefully that answers the question, but I don't think there's an easy answer that says this magically does it. You need to put the structure in place to make that work.
Great, thank you, Cody, for being our question moderator. Really appreciate that. Great job, and we appreciate not all of the questions are answered, but every single question that was asked is eligible for that prize later on. But it'd be remiss of me to not cover in the limited time we have left two other topics, which I think are absolutely key to this conversation. And I think one is the value of partnering and how you select the appropriate partner for the journey that you're going on. And then secondly, the importance of having the right skills in your business and how you get the right skills for every stage of that journey. So it's almost two in one, that kind of question, but I am conscious of time. Chris, I wonder if you could maybe start by kind of giving us the kind of broader lens on that. And then Ian, if you could pick up on how that pertains to your particular journey.
Yeah, I think what I've seen, and just like Ian mentioned, there's a spectrum. I've seen some organizations that really want to drive their own outcome, have the right skills, and build that in-house. And I see the others that want to fully lean on a partner in that regard, and there's a lot in between. From my viewpoint, engaging with a lot of customers on this, it's one, choosing the right partner that understands your strategy, that has the expertise that's there, but ultimately that they're incentivized to drive the right outcomes inside of that. And I think obviously that incentives are a big deal in all of FinOps, but it's especially true when you have a partner as well, because in a lot of the great FinOps organizations, they're incented to drive the right outcomes for organizations and be an enabler for that. And the pattern I see with a lot of customers is they need a partner on the front end to get started because they just don't have the skills, the knowledge, and the awareness, but they also want to build those skills in-house. So the partner really supports them through building out that training and education. So from my experience with customers, again, spectrum, I think you can fall anywhere on that, but partners will accelerate you on this journey and have deep knowledge that can enable that. That's definitely the pattern I've seen. Great, thanks. And you're probably the most objective person kind of to give us that view on this particular panel. Ian, so kind of bring that to life for us. How is that been in your experience?
No, exactly what Chris said. I think when we started this, you know, we're quite independent, right? We've got a bunch of people that have cloud experience, a lot of infrastructure experience. You know, we think we can do it all. And to a certain level, you can, right? I think you can start doing this stuff. But I think a lot of cloud and a lot of the transformation and migration journey, it's deceptively simple on the surface. But to make it work, the reality is underneath the surface, there's a lot of hard work and a lot of stuff that you've got to do. And you know, I like to think that if we kind of put this on a graph that was, you know, value and time, could we have done it by ourselves? Yeah, probably over time. But I think, you know, the graph, the curve would have been a lot shallower and the peak was a lot lower, and it would have been extended a lot longer. And I think, you know, understanding that is, you need the experience of doing it. It's not just the technical skills on how to be able to deploy stuff in the cloud. You need the skills to do it and to be able to check yourself that what you're doing is right and accurate, and then support you through that model. And also, you know, the huge, I think, to be fair, all of the cloud service providers are similar, but there's a huge array of tools, incentives, you know, map programs, savings plans, you know, to help make sense of that. Because if you've only done this in a small way and you've dabbled with it, that can be quite overwhelming when you look at all that stuff. So I think, partners bring that experience, they bring the knowledge, and also, the getting away from FinOps ever so slightly, but it still influences, is you need migrations to be fast. As we said, the longer you dual run, the more expensive they are. And being able to leverage that experience to get there quickly and reach that velocity quickly is really important. And if you try and do that organically, it will take you longer. It will be harder, and you will be protracted in that piece of work. So I think the partner is important, and choosing the partners. I'm certainly not going to provide advice on how to go through a partner vetting program, but I think it's just so important that you have confidence and trust. And for us, we met with several different companies. I think the relationship with Evident or CloudReach, as it was, it was kind of very quick and easy. The relationship was very quick and easy to build, and the confidence was built just in terms of the way, they helped us support the data, they helped us provide, support the business case, and we're able to, we'll be able to kind of present to the wider business as well. But those are all key indicators, I think, and also keep in mind it's a long-term relationship. These aren't 1 month programs, so you got to make it work. And I think, just to close, I know we're close on time, but one of the things to close it out was when we closed our phase 1 migration program with Evident. I think one of the best kind of compliments I can give both to our team and to Evident was we didn't really have a sense of it being a partnership. It was just one team. And I think, for us, that proved that, that we made a good choice there. But we really did. The integration between the teams, just the collaboration, and even the we don't want to talk about friendships, but it's built on people right at the end of the day. And just the way that we work together in that way was also really important. So, that was a massive compliment that we came away just thinking it's one team, for the duration of that piece of work.
Well, that's a wonderful sentiment on which to kind of draw that to a close. There's so many other things that we could have talked about today. We didn't get into tooling. We didn't get into a whole lot of topics, including kind of culture. So I would definitely encourage anybody who's interested in getting to grips with this at a much deeper level to take advantage and to express your interest in engaging in one of the workshops with Stephen. So please do get in touch. Don't be shy. And even if you don't want to do that, if you've got any kind of key questions, please do engage with us. Colin, if you could just pop in the chat exactly how you would like people to get in touch with us, that would be brilliant. I'm just going to thank all of our presenters here. And I think I'm going to steal and put you all on the spot and ask you to give your 20-second just closing thought to leave our audience with before Cody closes the call in 2 minutes time. So, right, Chris, I am going to start with you, rapid fire.
Yeah, no, from my viewpoint, it's never too early to get started. So I would encourage that. One thing we didn't talk a lot about, but I think getting some element of championship and sponsorship from IT or finance leadership is a really important element. So building the case around this. And just start small, because usually this is kind of scrappy teams coming together who are really passionate about this, and then you could scale it to your organization. And I loved Ian's point of kind of this one team notion. It doesn't matter if partners, no partners, you need to integrate as one team with FinOps, especially between the engineering and finance community, which I don't see all the time with customers. So definitely focus on that partnership and relationship side of things as well.
Fabulous. Word perfect. Stephen, you're up next.
I think one of the key things that kind of comes from a question someone asked that we've not had time to properly answer is it doesn't really matter where FinOps starts in your organization. It matters that it does. It can be in finance. It can be in technology. Quite often it's about who sees the problem first. And it doesn't matter where it sits. It just matters that you're doing it and you've got people that care about it, that are building the bridge between the departments that are involved. So don't worry if you're thinking, are we the right people to start doing it? Just start.
Brilliant. Ian, in a word?
Yeah, start early, take it seriously, drive it, don't wait for it to happen organically, and build those relationships.
Fabulous. Thank you so much to all our panel. I really, really appreciate you giving so generous of your time and sharing your insights with our audience today. Cody, over to you in the closing seconds to wrap it all up.
Great, Tara, thank you so much. And Ian, Stephen, Chris, thank you all so much for joining us as well today on Techstrong Learning. I'd like to remind our audience that our session today was recorded. So should you want to rewatch or share this recording with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it living on the Cloud Native Now website. Just visit cloudnativenow.com/webinars. Be sure to look in the on-demand section where it will be waiting for you. So Techstrong's $425 Amazon gift card giveaway. We have 4 winners. They are Gino B, Cornelia H, Mitchell G, and Robert G. Now, as far as Evident's £50 or €60 Amazon gift card giveaway, they will be giving that away by the end of the week. So be looking out for an email from them. As far as the 4 winners that I just announced, keep an eye out for an email from me, and that will be going out to you here in the next few hours. If you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it happens to be filtered out. I'd like to thank Evident for sponsoring our program today and for assembling such an incredible panel. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. I do have a link that I pasted in the chat. It's pinned at the top. Feel free to click that link and let us know what your thoughts about our program today, or if you have recommendations for future topics, please let us know there. Also, if you are interested in Stephen's workshop, let us know there and we'll be sure to pass the word along. So with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and you may now disconnect. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.